Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Opapari, and this is the Songwriters on Process podcast. Since 2010, I've been interviewing songwriters about their writing process. And on this podcast, we go deep, deep, deep into the writing process, far deeper than the usual. Do you start with the lyrics or the music question? By way of background, I have a PhD in English literature, and I'm a prose writer myself. I'm not a songwriter. In fact, I've never written a song in my life. But my goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers and poets, just as writers, plain and simple, and have always been interested in the writing process. This is an intelligent conversation between two writers. And on this podcast, like I said, we go deep into the process. We talk about rituals, the seeds of inspiration, the role of movement on the process, writer's block, the revision process, pens, pencils, types of paper, and of course, we talk about books. You can find all the archived interviews on the Songwriters on Podcast website and across all streaming platforms. And with that, let's dive into this week's episode. And today on the podcast, it's Diiv. I am a huge, huge, huge Diiv fan. And it was very cool to have all four members of the band on the podcast. We had Cole, Andrew, Colin, and Ben. This was kind of a free-for-all for about an hour, a lot of back and forth. You know, they have their own Diiv podcast where I'm sure they do a lot of that. And I love that podcast, by the way, so you should definitely check that out. Diiv's new album is called Frog in Boiling Water on Fantasy Records. It is out now. It's fantastic. I'm biased. I don't think I've ever disliked anything that they've done. It's really one of those bands for me that from, top to bottom, every album I just love. And I just have always been so interested in what their creative process was like, because I think their music is so unique. And they didn't disappoint. We didn't really talk collectively about the process. It was individually what they do. As I suspected, these guys are all voracious readers, good discussions about pens and pencils and things we like to write on. And yeah, this was really one of my favorites. Like I said, these guys, I think the music is so fantastic. And so this was a lot of fun and hear individually about their process. And one last thing, I don't think that there was a lot of differences in each of their processes. So, which probably is what makes it work so well, that I didn't hear many, I do this. And they all do the same thing. It was a lot of differences in the process. And again, maybe that kind of yin yang is what makes the music so great. So with that, all the members of Diiv on the podcast today, Cole, Andrew, Colin, and Ben. Again, the album is called Frog in Boiling Water on Fantasy Records, and check it out. So, Cole, we'll start with you, and I'll just go down the line. Are you a create everyday type of person, or just create when the mood strikes? I find that some songwriters are very, feel strongly about creating in some fashion, no matter how bad it is, every day, or just feel like you have to just write when the mood strikes.
It's funny. It's kind of neither. I think everybody wants to be a create everyday person. Time is a bit of a constraint on that. I feel like sometimes I find myself like forcing the creativity, which sounds bad, but I think it's kind of cool to sit down and just like you have your tools in front of you and kind of like go from there. But I've never been able to have time to sit down all the time, and it's not. I love the like mythology of the like creativity striking, and maybe for some people it's like that. I think about music a lot, but more of just like okay, I have to go sit down and work on something now, and then see what happens.
So when you force it, is it forcing it hoping that something good will happen, or just do you feel like I've got to force it because I have to do something, even if it means I'll get something good later on, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's both. You just kind of see what happens. Like you don't, then you're not creating only in a specific mood or whatever. I don't know. I've had interesting results, just kind of sitting down in whatever mood I'm in or whatever's going on, just like snapshot that thing and then move on, and then maybe like come back to it later or something.
Yeah. Colin, how about you? Create every day or just when the mood strikes?
I'm definitely not create every day, even though I would like to be. But I do think that I'm also like when I get like the good song that just comes out of nowhere is only a product of me sitting down, for a 2 week stretch or something and making like a lot of like pretty bad stuff. So like I have to do the forcing first and then eventually the really good like distillation of everything I'm kind of going for just like comes out. But for me too, I feel like it has a lot to do with like the type of like media and other music that I'm consuming at the time. Like if I'm like in a particularly like ravenous state of mind with other music and I'm just like listening all the time, then I'll get like the flash. Um, but I definitely there's the whole like Paul McCartney thing where he like sits down at the piano like 2 or 4 hours every day, regardless of whether or not it produces anything good. And I wish I had that. I think I try more to like play an instrument every day and not like get so in my head about like I have to make something because then I can get really like my head starts like spinning and I start future tripping really hard about like, oh, this isn't good enough or this isn't for anything. And I get ahead of myself. And so I try to just play.
It's always weird to me that songwriting seems to be the only art form that where people don't say, like, if you listen to any writer, like novelist, they'll always say butt in the seat no matter how bad it is. Like no novelist will ever say, oh yeah, I write when I feel like it. It's always you got to write for 10 pages or 2 hours. And even like I think visual artists will tell you that too, but I don't know what the answer is, but it's funny how songwriters will rarely tell me, oh, yes, I sit down for 2 hours and then I stop. Um, I don't know the answer to that. That's more just an observation.
I think it's
Um,
hard with us too because we like for the most part aren't sitting down with like a piano and a pen
yeah.
or like a guitar and a pen trying to just write a song. We're always kind of thinking about like the production and the sounds and stuff like that. So sometimes doing that every day is like really overwhelming. You kind of have to like bank a lot of inspiration to be able to like approach something like that.
Yeah.
Whereas like writing, you kind of not to simplify it, obviously, but you really just have like the words. It's like a more straightforward kind of like put your head down and do it experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I could see that. Andrew, how about you? Where do you fall in this continuum?
Well, this last year's been like really hectic for me, so I've like had zero free time. But before that, I'm definitely an everyday butt in the seat type of dude. I like to think of it as going fishing, where like you go fishing every day, but you only catch small fish if you catch anything at all. But then one day you catch the big one, and that's why you do it. But you're never going to catch that big one if you're not out there every day. And I find that when I do catch a big one, it like lasts for a while. And so whenever I make a cool demo, then I'm like, all right, tapped in. And then the next like week or two, I'm just like banging out. And so like a lot of my favorite songs that I've written came from like 2 week stretches of demoing. And then there's like 2 months after that of like pure garbage.
I want to get back to that idea of monotonous activities and fishing in a second. But Ben, I want to hear your take on every day or just when the mood strikes.
I am a everyday guy, but it's um it's just for fun. Like I have very few hobbies outside of music that aren't just consuming either music or movies or books. Um so but it's not like clocking in type of thing. I usually have a Logic session open on my computer. So, a lot of times just like first thing in the morning, like in my underwear, I'll go mess around with what I was around with last night. But unfortunately, you know, Colin and Cole both were like, I wish I could do that every day, but it really does not yield a lot of results because I put no pressure on myself. And so there's uh not a lot of really keepable good stuff comes out. And a lot of times I just kind of delete the project. I find that helpful so that I don't have thousands of Logic projects on my computer. But like I would say the year that we were working on this last record the most, I wrote so much more during that period than like, the last like 2 years because I actually had a goal in mind. And I think that's really important to sit down with intention rather than just poking around for fun.
So what a goal, but the goal is the long-term goal, not necessarily a goal like that day or anything.
Well, sort of. In that context, it was like the goal was to get a song or get a part of a song that would eventually make it onto the record, or take an existing thing and polish it down to something good enough that other people could hear it.
Okay, next question. I have a couple of quotes I want to read to you. One is by a writer, the other one is by a songwriter. So Agatha, I've got these up here. I'm looking over here. Agatha Christie, the writer, said, "The best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes." And I just read this interview with David Byrne. It's not a new interview, but David Byrne said, "A car is a good place to write lyrics. Driving occupies one part of your brain, freeing up the other." So I'm fascinated by the idea of our ideas come to us during periods of monotonous activity. That's why I asked about the fishing, because I do find that songwriters get ideas when they are walking, driving. Some songwriters tell me they get ideas when they are vacuuming, when they're cleaning, when they are doing some kind of activity that involves no conscious thought. The unconscious then bubbles up. So I want to get all of your takes on that. Cole, we'll start with you about, do ideas come to you when you're engaged in some kind of monotonous activity?
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in a culture of just like constant stimulation, constant entertainment options for whatever you need to fill every like waking second. And so it usually is, I was painting my son's room and there was like a area of the ceiling that I forgot to sand down, and it had these like this texture. And I just remembered, like, when I was a kid, I knew every detail of my ceiling because I spent so much time just staring at it. And then I was like thinking about that, and I walked in my room and I was like, I don't know what the fucking ceiling looks like because I'm not just sitting there staring at it. And so then, like, when you're forced into that kind of like reflective, like meditative thing while you're preoccupied by something else, I find that a lot. It was happening while like driving or whatever, where you kind of just you have this like thought process that's like evolving in your head, and then like you distill some type of idea, and then you can like stash that away in like a note on your phone, and then kind of like reverse engineer the thought process. So I think that did happen a lot on these lyrics, but I like, it's interesting to hear from like David Byrne and Agatha Christie, who are like operating in a different paradigm. But I do think that it's like really reflective of just like the lack of like true downtime or like boredom, or like I haven't been bored in like 10 years or something like that. And those are the times when you kind of get into those like reflective feedback loops in your head, and that's where like ideas can surface or whatever.
So let me bring up something else, and that is that there was an article in the Washington Post about 6 months ago about why we get our best ideas in the shower. And it's exactly what we're talking about, is when we're engaged in something that requires no thought. I mean, I'm a prose writer, not a songwriter, but I've never gotten ideas thinking to myself, how can I get these ideas? They're always coming to me when I'm doing something that involves none of that. And I'm fascinated by how we get to that, like, because at some point, if you consciously engage in an unconscious activity, right? So if I say, I'm going to do the laundry, I'm going to fold clothes, maybe an idea will come to me, then it's not going to happen. But it happens when we are deliberately not thinking about it, if that's possible. But Ben, okay, so since you're here, so do you get, are there specific times or activities that you do find to be more productive?
Yeah, it's funny because I find it really frustrating because a lot of times, like say you're in the car and you have a really good idea, you can't then act on that idea in that moment. And so you kind of have to try to hold on to it until you can get in front of the thing that you're going to use to execute the idea. But I think that it's also important to like engineer times where you occupied, like I love to go on like long walks and just, you know, I think there's definitely something to when your body is occupied doing something, it lets your brain deal with those kind of low level whatever, like taking steps and breathing and stuff, and then it frees up some space. But yeah, I find it frustrating a lot of times because I'll either have to stop on my walk and sit down and write something, or just kind of allow it to slip away forever.
And again, with prose writers too, walks are that tends to be a time of great productivity. I mean, the first interview I ever did for this podcast was with the band Murder by Death. And the songwriter's name is Adam Turla. And he said he wrote one album when almost all the songs he wrote on a hike. And he realized that the songs matched the cadence of the hike he was on that day. And he didn't realize it until afterwards. So, all right, Colin, you're next, and then Andrew. Colin, so how about you? Do you get ideas during those monotonous activities?
Yeah, I'm like always I'm like always humming to myself and whistling, and like I have a very overactive musical brain, but a lot of times it's just like the dumbest shit possible. It's like this reflexive like ADD part of my brain or something that's just like melodies running and stuff. But every now and then I do have an idea, but again, it's like the problem. It's not so much a problem, and maybe this is what Ben was referring to, but it's like I can like write a song or a part and think about the bass and the guitar and the vocal melody and the drums. I can make a vocal note. So it's not like I'll lose the idea, but I might lose the enthusiasm or the spark around actually like acting on the idea. And so then I sit down and it's like I have all the pieces, but I'm missing like the kind of like glue that like puts them together and makes it compelling to me in the moment. That's I think the biggest frustration with those kind of like idle time ideas that I do get, where it's like this is cool, but like there's a lot of work that goes from this to like actually recording it and being like, oh, it's a song now.
Yeah, and that it's funny. Ben, you mentioned driving that when you're driving and you get those ideas, I could unfortunately probably tell you a lot of the songwriters who probably act on that impulse while they're driving and they don't wait to pull over, but that's another issue altogether. Andrew, how about you? Do these ideas come to you during those times?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What you were saying is definitely true. Like keeping the monkey mind occupied with something like frees up your actual focus or whatever. But I was a writer before I was a songwriter. And so that was just sort of like part of how I do it anyway. Like I always have a notebook in my pocket, and usually what happens for me is I'll just start writing uninspired by anything. I'll just like literally write what I'm doing. Like, all right, I'm walking down the street. Oh, some guy just looked at me weird. But then it evolves into this like really deep thing that I wasn't consciously thinking of. There's something about the act of like writing that is that monkey mind activity for me. Where like if I'm just writing mundane, like this is what I'm doing right now, that frees up this other part of my mind to actually engage with something. And I don't know. I really like doing that. And I even do it with like, I don't know if I have a difficult decision to make or if something's bothering me and I can't understand why. If I just start writing about how I feel about it, the same thing happens where it like reveals what I actually want or think about or like what side of the decision I should go towards or something like that. And so I'm always like thinking I think one thing, then I write about it and I come out of it like, oh, actually, it's the opposite.
Is that a tool you learned in rehab? Because I did that. That was an exercise we did in rehab.
No, the writing exercise I did in rehab was also really fun though. It was write a autobiography. Like I wrote, I think it was supposed to be really short, but they said I wrote the longest one ever. But then we had to burn it afterwards. It sucked. I wanted to keep mine. They made me set it on fire.
Now you said monkey mind.
Yeah.
What is monkey mind?
Um, that's a term that I borrow from like Westerners trying to explain Zen Buddhism to people like me, I think. But it's the idea that there's this part of your brain that's like restless. And if you're a Buddhist, you believe that that is like the source of human suffering. It's just this part of your brain that's like evolutionarily designed to make you constantly have to think about things and worry and stuff. And so, like, if you're like me and you have really bad anxiety, it helps to give that monkey in your mind something to play with.
Interesting.
And so, like, you know, during this interview, I'm making a bracelet, you know, but I haven't like consciously thought about the bracelet the entire time.
Yeah.
It's just something that I have to do in order to focus on the interview.
Yeah, our daughter does that too. Our youngest daughter, she's playing with she for the same reason you are. So,
Yeah, I learned that it worked when I was in middle school and I was assigned Of Mice and Men and I couldn't read it because I couldn't focus. And my mother was like, "All right, bet you sit down and play Nintendo, and I'll read it to you, and we'll see if that works." And it did. I sat there playing GoldenEye, and she read me Of Mice and Men, and I got an A on the test.
you know, that I think that's related to that idea that you're engaging, I mean, in an unconscious activity. I mean, some people say folding clothes or gardening or vacuuming, but that's that same thing is you're engaged in unconscious activity, which is the bracelet. You're not really thinking about it, but that's making you more productive. I love that idea. So my follow-up to all of you. So I had Jerry Harrison of the Talking Heads on the podcast, and he said that whenever he writes, he uses a pen and paper, and he has to use a felt tip pen because he loves the sensation of the scraping of the pen on the paper. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, that he wasn't a ballpoint. He had to have a felt tip pen. So Andrew, you are pulling out a felt tip pen as we speak. So
Yeah, I'm the exact same way.
yeah.
It's gotta be felt.
Okay. And then I could do a whole podcast dedicated just to the types of pens and the colors of ink and the types of paper that songwriters love. And to me, that's all about the ritual. I'm the same way. You know, I've got my pen here. But Andrew, so does it have to be, I'm guessing that it does, and I'll ask all of you this, but
It doesn't have to be. If I can't get my hands on a felt, I'll use a ballpoint, but I hate it. And I end up writing about how there's so many pages in my journals that are just, God damn it, another ballpoint. I'm looking for another one right now. I'll see if I can find one.
and yeah. So Cole, how about you?
Like, what type of pen do I enjoy? I'm a felt tip person. You know, a lot of the way that we like write is just like on the computer, and
Yeah.
I try, you know, I print everything out. You know, I've got maybe it's wasteful, but I can't focus on it unless it's like physical.
So, and you said, so it's got to be, and does the color of ink matter to you or no?
I kind of like red pens because they were like forbidden when we were growing up. Like the teacher got the red pen and everybody else had to use blue or black. So the red ones feel, it's like finding out they sell the Boy Scout badges at the Boy Scout store. You know, you can just like get the forbidden object right there.
That's great.
There's
Colin,
a
how
Boy
about
Scout
you?
store.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I didn't,
it's
there is.
real.
I'm like a notes app person, but I've never considered that. Part of the reason I have a bunch of like notebooks with like, stuff written down, but I've never thought about the pen being the obstacle, the type of pen. And I think I do really enjoy felt tip pens. Whenever we have to like sign stuff, if someone has like a nice felt tip marker, I'm like, oh, here we go.
Yeah. Remember that one in Thailand that I stole and I used it for like 2 years? And we were all like, this is the best pen to sign stuff with ever. And I was like, it's
Yeah.
mine now.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah, I
really,
should.
like, a
I'm gonna
whole-
order some felt tip pens. See what happens.
we have
There
a
you go.
harsh judgment process based around the type of pens that fans present us to sign stuff.
I've never had this in depth of a conversation with the band about types of pens. I expected a simple answer, not to go that far in depth. But Ben, how about you?
It's very romantic to think of a pen in a notebook, but it's super rare for me. I tried this last tour to do a tour diary, and I wrote 2 pages and didn't do the rest. I'm not very good at journaling, and most of my journal is like, I'm not good at this. I don't like this. Why can't I do this? Which is really
Same.
weird. I wish I could do more kind of a unconscious or stream of conscious type of writing, but I've been doing a dream journal though recently, and I don't want to like turn on the light and stuff, so I do it like Colin on the Notes app on my phone. So, and that's most of the stuff I write. Like I said, like if I'm on a walk or something, I'll just sit down real quick and do it on the Notes app.
So I bring up what other songwriters tell me just because I'm not a songwriter. So that's why I love to kind of get your thoughts on these ideas that other people tell me. But I had the producer Daniel Lanois on the podcast a few years ago, and he said that he loved to write. It has to be 11 by 22 unlined paper, art paper that he writes on, because his process is entirely nonlinear. So he'll write words on all the corners, and there's thought bubbles and arrows, and there's nothing linear about it at all. But he has to do it that way. It's got to be unlined. It's got to be 11 by 22 and that thing is a complete fucking mess when he's done with it. I thought that was so fascinating that it the paper had to be a reflection exactly of how his brain was operating. So, Cole, I'd love your take on how linear the process is to you. I think you showed me, but what is that paper like for you?
I mean, I feel like giving yourself rules like that can be scary. Like any obstacle to creativity is like it reminds me of like the beginning of adaptation or something where he's like thinking about what kind of muffin he wants, and like you can like put all these roadblocks like, oh, I don't have the right pen, so it's kind of just like whatever is around. But I think like in terms of like linear beginning to end, the like I feel like notebooks and the notes app are good for collecting like assorted ideas, but then when we get to like actually kind of putting things onto the page, we this whole time used like a shared Google Doc so we could just see where everything was at. People could chime in. It's a collaborative process, so it like I think the individual experiences speak less to like what we actually did, which was collaborative, and in this just like Google Doc or whatever it is just seems like the most streamlined way to like have a shared space where we're not I mean, I do send a lot of like photos of pieces of paper to send ideas to the band, and my handwriting sucks and it's like not the best way. So yeah, that's kind of what we do.
Yeah, Cole is the master of turning literally anything into a note page. Like what was the thing he made a set list out of that a fan got a hold of? It was like a tax return or something.
Oh, that was really bad. Yeah, I on my like 1099 or something, I wrote a set list on the back, and then somebody posted like, I got the set list from the show, and I was like, oh fuck, my social security number's on there, so I had to like ask if you could take it down. But yeah, I mean like whatever's on hand, which right now is like this instruction manual or whatever, it's covered in notes, like and then you send a photo of that to the band and it becomes, especially in my handwriting, like illegible.
And I'm so interested in that because a lot of songwriters tell me that they write it's like this catch-22. They tell me that to make the process less precious, they write on like the backs of utility bills or things to make it less precious. But I feel like the second you have an awareness of it being less precious, it's now precious, right? But I hear that all the time about how they will write, to make it they won't have the fancy notebook. They'll write on whatever is around. And I'm guilty of that too. I feel like the more I tell myself I can only write in a certain place, that limits me. And then that makes it so that when I do need to write, it's like, oh, I can't do it. I'm not in my chair.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
There's
paralyzing.
an Allen Ginsberg line about that like flipped a switch in my brain where I've like been able to just abandon that idea altogether. I think it was in the poem America where he says something just like, oh, I can't write it unless I'm in my right mind. And I was like, holy shit, I've said that so many times and it's obviously bullshit.
I quoted Allen Ginsberg to Jerry Harrison, and his first response was, Alan was a good friend of mine. And I thought, okay, I'm done here. Like, where do I go with that when I'm quoting this guy and he was a good friend of his. So, anyway, so I'm going to read a couple of quotes to you. And Colin, I'll start with you. And I'm curious, I've got some quotes here by writers, and I some of these I think are especially illuminating. So here's the first one. So this is H.L. Mencken. He said, the value of writing seems to be in inverse proportion to the ease of writing. Whatever flows freely and bubblingly turns out to be sorry stuff a week later. So, Colin, do you find that do you trust the stuff that happens too easily, or are you less trustful of those ideas that just happen, as he said, so freely? And because some songwriters tell me the stuff that happens too easily, they're a little skeptical of. So, Colin, we'll start with you.
I like completely disagree with that, but only in like specifically having to do with music, because I feel like a lot of times like the Tom Waits school of thought or whatever, just like waiting for the muse and like trying to catch it, like that. A lot of the stuff that I connect with the most are the ideas that just like happen. And I think that actually there's like more of a danger of kind of like overcooking things with music. And then it gets to a point where you're like, oh, it lost the special thing. But again, I feel like it's funny talking about songwriting because there's like so many phases of the process. And in the early phases, I feel like kind of trying to like really value and like create opportunities for that kind of spontaneous idea is really good. But then eventually you have to start like workshopping it. And there's an inevitability of like, okay, now we have to like really like all get together or yourself just like hyper focus on parts and make sure that they're polished. And so in the early stages, I feel like I'm always like, I'm desperate for those moments where something just happens. Cause for me, that's like always like, that's when I'm not thinking, I'm flowing and I'm like feeling the music.
So when those things happen freely and bubblingly, are you less likely to change them because you felt like, oh, that was so spontaneous, I probably shouldn't touch that?
Yeah, sometimes for better or for worse. Sometimes it's good not to touch it because it has like the special thing. Other times it's bad not to touch it because you're just having like we call like I'm sure someone's talked about demoitis or whatever.
Yeah.
But you get overly attached to your initial idea because you think it's the best, and knowing when it's appropriate to kind of tinker is like half of the battle of making a song that will wind up on like an album.
Ben, you're next. Then Cole, get your take on that or whatever you're gonna say. Ben, go ahead. So do you trust
Cole,
the things that happen?
Don't forget it.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Colin. I think that kind of the opposite is true. That I mean, it's kind of like we were saying in the first question of sitting down every day versus when inspiration strikes. Even if you are sitting down every day, sometimes inspiration just strikes and I think one of the most difficult things is completing the idea so that when you're in that kind of flowing zone, not, breaking for lunch or whatever, but like keep going. And because a lot of times even if you just get up to like get a cup of water, you come back and like all the momentum has gone. So I feel like that kind of, how did the guy say it? Bubblingly.
Freely and bubblingly.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the most important zones to harness when you're creating.
All right, Cole, do you remember what you were saying?
Yeah, like I agree with that. I guess the thing I was gonna talk about was like, when we're songwriting, especially musically, we're kind of like solving a puzzle, but we've like created the puzzle too. And so like this there, like if you have a chord progression and only one melody works over it, then you're like, maybe this chord progression isn't so good. And it's like when you create like a bed of a song where there's like all these different potentials and like then the ideas flow bubblingly, so to speak, then those are usually like the best songs because then you kind of there's like multiple ways to approach the puzzle and multiple paths you can take. So it's like we want to create an environment where those ideas flow like that because that is like what we're after.
Ben, you said something, and it reminds me of what Hemingway said. Hemingway said he would always stop writing when he knew he had something left to say because he was terrified of starting the next day with nothing to say. So whenever he felt like, and I have this is probably a fault of my writing, is that when I have something good to say, I put it off because I'm terrified of one day having no ideas. And so I probably should act on that, but I'm much more of that sense of, oh, well, I know it's in there. So I feel good that eventually I will have something to write. But Hemingway always said whenever he had a lot to say, that's when he would stop because he just did not want to wake up the next morning and have an empty mind.
I can relate to that. I think that that's one of the most terrifying things about putting something out and why I have tons of material that have never put out because there's this idea that it's like I have like a finite number of ideas or something and I don't want to waste them.
Okay, I want to read. This is the favorite quote of songwriters. This is from E.L. Doctorow. I'm going to read this twice. Writing is like driving at night in the fog. You can only see as far as the headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. Ooh, I love that. I'm going to read that again. Writing is like driving at night in the fog. You can only see as far as the headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. So, Cole, we'll start with you. What's your reaction to that? Do you have a goal in mind, or is it better to start and have no idea where those things are going?
I mean, you're always going to be like limited by your own perception and like, you're like at the end of the day, you are the one writing it. And so you are writing from your perspective and your frame of reference or whatever. And so like, it's impossible to make art that's like all encompassing or whatever. You can really only speak to, your perspective or like try to take in like empathetically another one. But, like having the end goal in mind can be really scary, like another obstacle. For me, like to me it's just important to like kind of like a lot of times when I send ideas to the band or something, it'll be called like dump or like vomit or something like that. And there's obviously you want an end product at the end, but kind of part of the journey of writing songs is like discovering that along the way. And I don't buy into the idea that like maybe some people are like this, but that songs like pop in your mind fully formed or whatever. For us, it's like so much of a journey and like chasing this kind of like ephemeral thing, which is fun. It's like discovery, problem solving. It's like a puzzle, like I said. So you're kind of solving it until it's like taken away from you at the end, and then what you're left with is the thing.
And I don't think I have any right knowing what something I'm starting with is supposed to look like at the end. I literally don't think I have a right to know that. But Colin, I guess when you start to write, do you have, is it better to know where you want to go, or is it better to not have any idea?
Oh, yeah, I think it's good to have it's only good to have a really foggy idea of where you're going, because the moment the fog clears, that's usually when things like fall apart to me, where I either start like future tripping or like over analyzing like the detail. I get too detail oriented, where I'm like, the song isn't even like fully fleshed out yet, and I'm starting to like really like trip about like what the reverb on the guitar in the left channel sounds like or something. And that's like the fog clearing. I feel like eventually again, I'm very like, songwriting for me is like the multi-step process or whatever. It's never just like pen and paper. So I'm always thinking that like the end result should be the fog clearing a bit. When you finally get there and you're like, the song is done, it should be a little, the weather should have cleared up a little bit. You still want some fog so that there's like mystery and like, je ne sais quoi in the feeling of the song or whatever. But I feel like delaying that kind of clearing of the fog is the secret for me.
Andrew, how about you?
Yeah, it depends what I'm writing. With music, it's definitely a foggy situation. And with writing, it's like with prose, it's not like, I like to have an idea and work towards it, and like I know how the story's going to end, type of thing. But with poetry, it's not. In poetry, I find to be more similar to writing music, where it just sort of, you like capture something that you think is cool. Whether like in music, it could be just like, oh, it's cool, this lick, if I like flat the second scale degree, and now it's like this weird thing, and then you sort of build around it. And with poetry, I feel like it's the same idea. You get like one line that's cool, and then you try to build around it. So yeah, I very rarely. I mean, I suck at writing music, so, or at least finishing writing songs, So like a lot of my demos just remain demos forever because I don't know how to finish turning it like a cool chorus or something, or even just like a cool guitar part into a full song. But that's what these dudes are here for.
All right, Ben, how about you? So what's your take on the fog? Is the fog good, or how do you feel about that?
Well, it's kind of like video games use fog to make it so that it doesn't overload your CPU by loading the entire environment of the whole world. So they use fog as a way to obscure the environment so that you don't have to have the whole entire thing. But as you go, the part that you've already loaded, I think, should remain or should stay unfogged. You know what I mean? Like, because I just imagine uh like Lost Highway or something, where it's all you can see is directly in front of the headlights. But you can't, I don't think, get all the way to the end that way, because then everything that you've unobscured that's behind you will stay obscured. So you kind of have to like draw a map, and you don't erase it after you go over the path. I have no idea what that means for songwriting, but
I don't know, but let me just say for the record, those are the best answers I've ever gotten to that question. So,
Can I add something
yes.
It's hard to go first. Everybody has, but I like, we've been talking about songwriting and then lyrics and like prose, and I think they're like really different processes. I feel like for lyrics and prose, it's for me so important to have the end, like, over a song. You're like, for me, my favorite songs is like where you're learning something, like the narrator is like learning something, and you kind of have to have the destination there and then like reverse engineer it. And so in terms of lyrics, that's kind of like, you have all these thought processes and you wind up at this conclusion, but you can't have that be the first line. You kind of have to walk through the same thought process to make it, into like something more than just like a nonsensical sentence. So I guess that it would differ in like writing music and writing lyrics in that sense.
Last question. I do find that songwriters are voracious readers. So I don't know if you can see I have a poster behind me that says read banned books. So I would not be, I have to read every day in some
Is that the
fashion.
LeVar Burton, Jordan Yule campaign?
The post, no, it's the read banned books. It's a journal called The Bitter Southerner, and it's based in Athens. Our oldest daughter goes to University of Georgia, but she's taking a class now called The History of Music in Athens, which is an amazing, all the stuff she's learning about. It's so cool. But anyway, yeah, so that's from that journal, a read banned books. I have another t-shirt that says libraries are essential. So let's just go down the line. Ben, we'll start with you. Cole, you'll go last to even it out. So, Ben, how important do you get to read? Who are your favorite writers? And let's have at it.
It's super important to me. Even beyond reading, just like books as an object are super important because I'm really interested in visual art, and I'm not rich enough to really own any art. So owning an artist book is kind of the closest I feel like I'll get. So I think books are like so fucking cool as objects and as reading material. But my kind of early favorites, I think Kurt Vonnegut was probably one of the first guys to open up fiction for me. Cat's Cradle specifically. I don't know, it changes a lot. I'm kind of doing a Eastern European thing right now. This guy from Romania, I can't pronounce his name, but the book is called Solenoid. I've talked about it in like 5 interviews at this point, but because I've been reading it forever, it's like 800 pages. So it's taken me, I've been reading it since January. I'm on the last chapter, but I'm also, on that. I'm a very slow reader. So it's kind of a struggle, but it's something that is super important. I don't really know how to answer the question, but it's definitely important to me.
Well, 2 things. Vonnegut always comes up with songwriters. I'll tell you, there's probably 4 writers: Vonnegut, McCarthy, Bukowski, and I feel like there's one more, but Vonnegut always comes up.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then Hemingway also said all writers should go to art galleries. Like Hemingway was big on, if you want to be a writer, you have to look outside of writing to get inspired. And he thought it was very important to him to go to art galleries. Colin, how about you? And then Andrew will hopefully get back to Andrew. But Colin, how about you? You have the Diiv. Is that a Diiv sweatshirt on? Look at that! Wow, maybe I should have made this a video. I love the plug. Anyway, so go ahead. Yeah, writing how important is that to you as a songwriter? Reading.
I wish I read a lot more. I also went to. You said you're an English professor, right?
Yes.
That was I got a bachelor's degree in English, and I read a lot when I was in college, but I've like lost the spark. I still read, but like really sporadically, and I try to get the most out of. I hope to read, if I'm going to read a book, for it to be like a really, good, like life-changing book. And it's funny, you said it says read banned books, right?
Yes.
BAN, and I said read bad books, which I was like, that's a good take, because like that deals with like my paralysis of like when I think to like, oh, I want to read a book, like I'm like, well, I don't want it to be bad, it's going to take so much of my time. But like I feel like that's an important part of the process, like developing your taste or whatever. But I think like I would write better music if I read more, and I know this, but I also try to be like forgiving now, and I try not to be too hard on myself about like not reading as much as I should or could, because there's any number of reasons why you can't. I was just trying to think. I also love Hemingway and Vonnegut. The last I read Three Body Problem, which I'm always trying to get these guys to read. The Chinese sci-fi series that's really good. But the last great book I read was that Madeline Campbell CRC. When you read that,
No, but I've heard it's good. Yeah.
rocked my world. And I'll read a book like that and I'll be like, oh my God. And it's like watching like a great film, you know? You're like, I'm gonna just only watch good films now, change my life. And then you wind up watching some fucking stupid ass shit on Netflix or whatever, you know? So I try not to be too hard, but yeah, I wish I read more is my short answer.
So my response to that is songwriters always, I always joke that it's the bragging rights are how far songwriters got through Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace before they stopped reading, no one ever finishes how far do I get before I quit. And I've never read that book. I've read other stuff, but I do find that I like to read short stories because I can read a short story in a sitting. And I'm not the type of reader that says, okay, I read something by that author, and now I have to read everything else by that author. I'm much more of a voice person. So if I buy a short story anthology of 20 short stories, I get 20 voices in my head. And I love that because you can read a short story in a sitting, and then I read something else in an anthology that's totally different. And I just love comparing those styles. But from practically, it's a hell of a lot easier to read a short story than it is a novel. So I find that to be much less daunting, I guess.
Yeah, I think I think I got 380 pages into Infinite Jest, and then I read a bunch of his essays.
There you have it. Cole.
I don't know. I feel like I've noticed a pattern in my reading consumption when it comes to songwriting, which is while we're in the really heart of writing, I'll consume a ton of poetry because it seems the most applicable to what we're doing, and thinking in that kind of mindset of a really concise idea, concisely articulated, you know. So W.S. Merwin and I mean yeah, the kind of short form poetry is huge for me while we're actually writing. And then we'll, in the stage before that, when we're kind of constructing the world, I'll read a lot of nonfiction. So on this one, Bailey recommended Chaos and The Devil's Chessboard, and a couple nonfiction books that I feel helped flesh out the world and root it in reality. And then the stage I'm in right now, which is we've just finished a record, I feel there's a clean palette and I can consume fiction again. So I'm reading Mao 2 by Don DeLillo right now. But yeah, I noticed that pattern the other day. It was funny that you asked about that.
I love that you have that the genres depend on what stage you are in your own creative process. And also, no one's ever mentioned Merwin before. So I love that. My favorite poets are Lee Young Lee and Galway Kinnell. But sadly, so few songwriters read poetry. I could probably count on one hand the number who say that they read any type of poetry, which I know it's not songwriting and that's different and all that kind of stuff. But wow, I feel like the economy of language and sounds, a good poem does those things too, obviously.
In my writing space, which is where we are right now, it's just all my poetry books are about, that's where, sometimes you can even just pull out a book and just sing a couple lines from it to flesh out a demo. But I feel like that is it's just such a concise and concise is the wrong word, but a loaded art form where every line can have all these implications. And so it's really interesting. I mean, we kind of are, that is kind of what we're doing. We're dabbling in the same form, more or less.
Absolutely. All right, Andrew, I think you are back. So what's your take on? Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right, cool. What's it called? Yeah, Cole mentioning that reminded me that I do read mostly nonfiction nowadays. My favorite book I've read in the last year was called Tripping on Utopia by Ben Breen. And it's about like the history of LSD and how there was like this split between spooks who wanted to use it to take over the world and people like Margaret Mead who thought that it would like usher in this like free open society type vibes. I highly recommend it. But right now I'm still reading Maxwell Basha a lot, the haiku writer, because I'm low-key ripping him off on a poetry project of my own, uh, which is usually how I operate. I'll like, if I want to make a specific type of art, then I'll just consume as much of that type of art as I can, you know? But Basha is like, yeah, he holds a special place in my heart. And I used to be really into Dostoevsky because he looks at the world. I mean, we disagree on pretty much everything, but the way he sees the world is how I see the world too, especially like interpersonal relationships and stuff. But then also like most liberal arts students, I went through all the phases of Vonnegut, Bukowski, had a beat poet phase. Miri Baraka was my favorite for a while. Ferlinghetti, stuff like that.
And that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget my book, Desolation, a heavy metal memoir by Mark Morton with Ben Opapari, that is me, comes out June 25th on Hachette Books. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is one of the guitarists in the band Lamb of God, and this is his memoir. It's a damn good book, if I do say so myself. But again, that book is out June 25th on Hachette Books. You can pre-order it now everywhere, your favorite online bookstore. So be sure to do that. The site, Songwriters on Podcast, contains all of the archived episodes of the podcast. Of course, you can find them on all streaming platforms as well, but they're also on the site. I only have had the podcast for about I don't think even 2 years. Before that, all of the interviews were transcribed, and that took a lot of work. And that's why I started the podcast. So if you want to read the interviews that I did before the podcast, they are on Songwriters on Podcast as well. There are about 200 of them going back to 2010. So check those out. If you want to get a hold of me, Ben at songwritersonprocess.com, or fill out a form on the website. I'm here for your questions, your complaints, your concerns, or your interview suggestions. I'd love getting those as well. So hit me up. I will try to respond. So that's it, everyone. Have a great day and see you next time.